Hey y'all, welcome back to another book review video. This time we are going to be talking about Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and I cannot really express how excited I am to be making this video. I actually first read this book 3 or 4 months ago before I even started this channel, and I just finished rereading it because I wanted it to be as fresh as possible in my mind to make this review. And I think the fact that I could reread it again so quickly and still genuinely enjoy the second time over so much already speaks volumes to how much I loved this story. But before we can get into that, I do have quite the laundry list of disclaimers I need to get through this time. The first one is my usual, that this is just my opinion, so if you guys disagree, it is totally fine, it's not personal, and I would love to hear your opinions in the comments down below. I also will be doing my spoiler-free section of the review before my spoiler-filled section of the review, so if you haven't already read Song of Achilles and you do intend to, kind of be on the lookout for where I start to place those spoiler warnings. Also, as per usual with my videos, my cat is here in the room with me, so if you hear her or see me moving to pet her, or worst case scenario, if she hits the tripod, I am sorry. There's not really anything I can do about that. She loves to be around me when I'm talking a lot, so she's just kind of going to be present for this video. On a much more serious note though, I do need to give a trigger warning for SA. I will be mostly talking about it towards the end of the video, but I'll be mentioning it every once in a while, so if you are sensitive to that, maybe just go ahead and skip this one for your own safety. I would rather, you not watch the video than end up, like, thinking about things that you don't want to be thinking about. And if you do decide to watch, kind of go into this knowing that that's going to be a thing and kind of at your own risk. And then lastly, I should say that I know I am fully aware I am a little bit behind the times in terms of the popularity of this book. I, in general, don't mean for this channel to be super up to date because that's just way too much pressure for me, but especially because this book has been so popular on social media, I felt like I needed to reiterate that I know I'm behind the times, I know I'm a little late to the bandwagon, but I still enjoyed it, so I still want to talk about it. So let's do that, I guess. Despite being titled Song of Achilles, the novel actually follows Patroclus as the narrator. Patroclus is born as a prince to a king who is less than thrilled with his son. After a violent incident, he is exiled and then goes to live with another king named Peleus, and coincidentally there he meets and befriends his demigod son Achilles. The two of them grow up together despite the fact that Achilles' mother, the goddess Thetis, is less than thrilled with their relationship, and they do grow closer and closer. When Achilles leaves his home to study with the centaur Chiron, Patroclus of course follows, and there, away from the judgment of both family and society, the two go from friends to lovers. Achilles, being part god, is a natural-born warrior, so when Helen of Sparta is kidnapped and taken to Troy, and all of Greece is traveling to get her back, he is of course called upon to fight also. Patroclus is much less inclined to fighting, but he would never leave Achilles' side, and so they both sail off to take part in the Trojan War. The problem is there is a prophecy saying that Achilles will die after taking the life of the Trojans' best warrior, Hector. With that threat kind of looming over their heads and yet still more in love than ever, Patroclus and Achilles try to balance life on the edge of the battlefield while also trying to avoid the death that would separate them. Obviously, there's only so much I can say about this book without getting into spoilers, but the most notable thing that I want to point out is Miller's writing style is one that I really enjoyed throughout the novel. She doesn't use really overly advanced language, and in fact I would say that she uses pretty much everyday English for the majority of Song of Achilles, but the way that she writes makes the words just flow so beautifully, and you can get so much from such relatively simple language. I could use literally 1,000 examples of quotes from the novel to kind of exemplify this, but this video is already going to be a really long one, and I don't want to bore you guys with just a lot of pretty quotes, so I will stick with just one as an example. During one battle scene, Patroclus narrates, "Achilles appeared from somewhere. He was blood-splattered and breathless, his face flushed, his spear smeared red up to the grip. He grinned at me, then turned and leapt into a clump of Trojans. The ground was strewn with bodies and bits of armor, with spear shafts and chariot wheels, but he never stumbled, not once. He was the only thing on the battlefield that didn't pitch feverishly, like the salt-slicked deck of a ship, until I was sick with it." Like I said, the individual words aren't over-advanced or super fancy, they're kind of just normal words, but the way that Miller strings them together just flows so beautifully, and there's just such an art to how she has put these words together, and also you get so much from so little. That was just one tiny paragraph, but you can recognize from that how terrible war is and how chaotic it is in general, how Achilles is strangely at ease in the midst of this chaos, and how Patroclus, conversely, is completely not at ease and finds it a lot harder to deal with. So it's not that complicated, it's not that long a passage, but you get so much and it sounds so beautiful, and I feel like the entire novel is like that. The only other thing I can say without getting into spoilers is that I love a good sad story, and I will be talking more about that later, but Song of Achilles definitely fits the bill in that regard. It is definitely a bittersweet novel, so if you also find yourself enjoying stories that kind of make your heart ache a little bit, I think that this might be a good one for you. But with that being said, we are going to be getting into spoilers now, so if you don't want to hear anything about that, this is the time to stop watching. Normally when I go and continue on with the spoiler-filled section of the plot, I would just pick up where I left off in the spoiler-free section of the plot, but I do feel like Song of Achilles specifically requires a little bit more detail. I know that some people listen to videos like this instead of reading a book, like they have no intention of reading the book, but they still like to hear about the story and hear what people think about it. So I feel like it's a good thing to have kind of a more detailed summary in here. If you don't like hearing this, if you've already read it and you're kind of bored by this, feel free to time skip to like the next actual kind of analysis or opinion chapter of this, but I did want to include a more detailed summary. So, as I had said before, Patroclus is born to a king who is not thrilled to have him as a son. Said king, Menodius, could be described as greedy in a word. When Patroclus is only 9, the famed beauty Helen is ready to be wed, and in an attempt to kind of bolster the status of his own kingdom, Menodius takes Patroclus there to be a suitor. Due to the fact that there are so many men who want to marry Helen, it is decided that she will choose her own husband. All of the other men will form an oath to protect their bond and their marriage, so that anyone who comes between them will have to face the wrath of many men, so that way no one man is kind of inclined to try to steal Helen away. Obviously, given that Patroclus is, again, only 9 years old when this happens, there are many more impressive men there than himself, so Helen chooses Menelaus as her husband. Nevertheless, Patroclus, as a 9-year-old, is forced to sign this oath, even though he has no idea what the ramifications will be later. Not long after, Patroclus has an altercation with a noble boy in which the boy tries to steal a pair of dice from him and pushes him. Patroclus retaliates, and in an extreme instance of bad luck, the boy falls, hits the hard ground, and dies instantly. Due to this crime, Patroclus either must be killed or exiled, and his father chooses to exile him, sending him to live with Peleus. Though there are many other boys there, Patroclus is very introverted and really only ends up making friends with Achilles because Achilles finds him interesting, and they end up becoming companions. The two learn and study and play together. Upon reaching their teenage years, Patroclus realizes that his feelings are kind of evolving from friendship into something else, and he kisses Achilles. Achilles immediately runs off, and Patroclus is confronted by his goddess of a mother, Thetis. Thetis is a very complicated character who I will be talking about more in depth later. For the purposes of this summary, though, it is important to know that she did not choose to wed Peleus and have Achilles. She was kind of gifted to Peleus by more powerful gods, and Achilles is the product of her rape. At this point in the story, Achilles does not know that he is destined to die. He knows that he will one day become a great warrior, but that is all. Thetis, however, does know the extent of the prophecies concerning her son and knows that he is going to meet his end on the battlefield. Therefore, she aims to try to make him so great a warrior that the gods grant him immortality, which would be the only way that she could help him avoid his fate. Because of this, Thetis views Patroclus as sort of an obstacle on the way to Achilles' greatness. She decides to send Achilles off to train with the centaur Chiron, but as I said earlier, Patroclus does follow, and once they're both there, Chiron decides to go ahead and train both of them against Thetis' wishes. The two boys continue to grow older, and in the piece found on Chiron's mountaintop, they do develop a romantic relationship. Patroclus and Achilles can unfortunately only enjoy so much time on Chiron's mountaintop before Achilles is called down to fight in a war. Helen has been kidnapped by Paris of Troy, and so her husband Menelaus has called upon all of the other men of Greece who signed an oath to protect their marriage, and they are setting sail to go to war to get her back. Because of the number of people in the oath, it's basically all of Greece that is setting sail to fight for Helen. Achilles is meant to be the best of the Greeks, so of course they want to recruit him as well. He is kind of lukewarm to this idea. While he isn't against the idea of fighting, he is enjoying his time with Chiron and of course with Patroclus, but in the end Achilles doesn't get to decide for himself because his mother does ferry him away in the middle of the night to hide him on an isolated island kingdom in an attempt to kind of delay the inevitable and have him not go off to war yet. While in hiding, Achilles is forced to marry and has a child. Patroclus fortunately does find him eventually, but unfortunately, so do the kings who are setting sail for Troy. There's a lot that happens here where Achilles finds out that he is destined to die, and Patroclus is kind of bullied into going as well because he technically is oath-bound to do so. In the end, both men end up sailing for Troy. Oddly enough, Achilles and Patroclus do find a small pocket of happiness in the war that they are a part of. Achilles knows that he will not die until after he has killed Hector, so he just avoids fighting Hector at all in order to eke out more days and months and years of happiness where he can live relative content in his day-to-day life with Patroclus. The other Greeks obviously are not so happy to be stuck in Troy for so long, and because they're there for so long and they're all kings, there's a lot of egos battling, there's a lot of pride happening here. Agamemnon, the High King who was leading the charge, eventually offends Achilles, and Achilles says that he will no longer fight for the Greeks. Without him on the battlefield, the Trojans gain the upper hand and threaten to burn all of the Greeks' ships. This would mean that they would be stranded in Troy, very far from home, with no way to return even if they were to be able to turn the tide of battle. Patroclus begs Achilles to go ahead and fight despite Agamemnon not apologizing for his offense, but Achilles refuses to do so. In a desperate attempt to save the comrades that he has gotten to know over the years, Patroclus dons Achilles' armor and goes into battle in his stead. However, he has nowhere near the battle prowess that Achilles has, and he is killed on the battlefield. Achilles is absolutely maddened by Patroclus' death and finally ends up killing Hector as an act of revenge. Of course, this means that he too eventually is killed, as the prophecies foretold, and because of his honor and his status, he is able to be buried properly. Patroclus is buried, but his name is not marked on a tomb, so he is forced to live as a shade in the human realm instead of being able to join Achilles in the underworld. This is the case for a long time until Thetis finally takes pity on him, carves his name into their shared tomb, and he is able to reunite with Achilles in the afterlife. I know this will not apply to everyone, but I have to talk about the immense shock I felt when Patroclus died. The only myth I was aware of surrounding Achilles was that of Achilles' heel, where his mother dipped him in the river Styx and was holding him by the heel. Therefore, that was the only part of his body that was vulnerable to attack. In that myth, the secret of his invulnerability gets out and he is struck in the heel with an arrow, leading to his death. So I knew that the story ended in death, but that was the only kind of myth that I was aware of. I had never even heard of Patroclus until opening this book, so everything that he was involved in was kind of a surprise to me when it came to the story of this novel. When I started reading Song of Achilles, I was fully prepared for it to be a tragedy because I knew the stories of Achilles and I expected Achilles to be dying. I spent the whole time I was reading kind of preparing myself to deal with Patroclus' death after Achilles would die. But of course, it was the exact opposite that happened, and when it did, I was completely floored. Obviously, if you went into this book with a little bit more knowledge of Greek mythology than I did, you might have known this was coming, and so it might not have been a surprise to you. But what was, for me, such a twist ending was what solidified Song of Achilles as a book that I knew would stay with me for a long time. The emotions that that scene gave me were just so strong and so raw that I almost feel like in the case of this book, going in with less knowledge is more impactful. Of course, that's what I felt reading it for the first time. When I went back and reread it for this video, I did find a lot of foreshadowing that I had completely missed in my first read because I obviously wasn't looking for it. So while the first read was more intense in terms of the emotions that I felt, I think that the second read was very enjoyable because there were a lot of little pockets of bittersweet knowledge that I could find with the foreshadowing. The first instance of foreshadowing that I noticed was when Chiron, Achilles, and Patroclus are discussing the tale of Heracles, specifically how, as punishment from the gods, he went mad, mistook his wife and children for enemies, and murdered them all. Achilles talks about the fact that he thinks it was very unfair of the gods to punish Heracles in this way because it was more of a punishment for his wife, who ultimately lost her life. To this, Chiron responds, "And perhaps it is the greater grief, after all, to be left on earth when another is gone." When I read that sentence the second time around, I got chills. I hadn't noticed it at all the first time, but the second time I knew that later on in the novel, Achilles would experience exactly what Chiron was talking about, and he would find out that Chiron is perfectly correct. It is so much easier to die yourself than it is to watch someone you love so deeply perish instead. And I thought this was a particularly beautiful example of foreshadowing because it's just one of many conversations that the trio have while they are training on the mountaintop. So it's not especially notable if you don't know what to look for, but when you do notice it, it just has such an impact. Another rather bittersweet example of foreshadowing in Song of Achilles is when Patroclus finds out that Achilles has been forced to take a wife. That wife, Deidamia, had been hiding Achilles as one of her dancers and trying to conceal the fact that he was living on the island with her. When Patroclus realizes this, he narrates, "Had she really thought I would not know him? I could recognize him by touch alone, by smell. I would know him blind, by the way his breaths came and his feet struck the earth. I would know him in death, at the end of the world." In the moment, it was just an exaggeration. It was Patroclus proclaiming how deep his love for Achilles was and how nothing could separate them for long. But by the end of the novel, everything just comes to be a little bit too true. Patroclus dies far away from home, and then even once Achilles dies, he cannot truly be with him because of the way that they are buried and the fact that he is not properly laid to rest. But the very ending line of the novel is them finally being reunited in the underworld, and Patroclus very literally knows Achilles in death. Again, I feel like it's just so beautiful and you might not notice it, but when you do, it really enhances the experience of reading Song of Achilles. I do know I'm being very long-winded, but I just have so much to say because I like this book so much. Like, I just enjoyed reading it so much. So I apologize if this is irritating, but I do want to share one more example of foreshadowing that I found to be really, really enjoyable. One night while in Troy, Achilles is talking to Patroclus about a vision of sorts that he has. He says it's kind of like a dream. Achilles says that he can see himself killing Hector, and of course, because of the prophecies, Patroclus asks what happens next. And Achilles responds, "That's the strangest of all. I look down at his blood and know my death is coming, but in the dream I do not mind. What I feel most of all is relief." Again, not necessarily something that you would put too much stock in upon first reading it, but when you get to the end of the novel and you know how everything plays out, that's exactly what happens. Achilles, by the time that he does kill Hector, has already lost Patroclus, and so therefore it's not a threat to his life to kill him because at that point he wants to die. He doesn't want to keep living without Patroclus. And I just really, really enjoyed the experience of rereading this novel because I felt like I got to have such a different experience. The first read was really nice because everything was surprising and shocking, and so you get all of those raw emotions, but I think the second read, you get so much more nuance, and so I really, really liked that I ended up reading this book twice in such a short time span because I feel like both experiences were so good in such different ways. This is perhaps only tangentially related to this segment, but I didn't really know where else to mention this, and I wanted to. I think it's very interesting that Miller creates a bit of misdirection during the course of Song of Achilles. As I said earlier, the only myth I knew about Achilles was that of Achilles' heel, and I would argue that that is one of the most commonly known myths surrounding this character. So throughout the course of the novel, Patroclus, as he narrates, does mention Achilles' feet a lot, which is a very weird sentence to have to say, but it's true. He talks a lot about his feet, and he's kind of drawing a lot of attention to the most famous part of Achilles' body. And I just think it's so fascinating because in Song of Achilles, the dip in the river Styx never happens. That's not a part of the book's canon mythos. So it was a bit of misdirection for Miller to mention Achilles' heel and his feet so often and then not end up doing anything with it. And I just really liked it because if you go in, like I did, kind of expecting that to be how the novel plays out, it's a fun little surprise that you expect to go somewhere and it doesn't. Though Patroclus and Achilles are two very different people, one thing that they do have in common is that throughout the pretty much entire course of the novel, neither one of them has much control when it comes to their own life choices. As I've mentioned, Patroclus comes from an unhappy home. His mother, due to an injury, is hardly ever aware of her surroundings, and at any given time probably could not be trusted to take care of herself, let alone her son. His father seems to see some of that fragility in Patroclus and has pretty much decided from the moment of his birth that he will not be happy with his son. So therefore, Patroclus grows up with kind of little guidance and even less love. On top of that, as a prince, his life path has already been laid out for him. At the age of 9, he is literally subject to his father basically attempting to pimp him out to bolster his own reputation. And even when that attempt at marrying him off fails, he still leaves that room bound by an oath that he has no idea truly of what it means. He can't possibly at 9 years old understand the implications of what he has agreed to, or rather been forced to agree to. Even once he is exiled, Patroclus doesn't find true freedom. Yes, he is taken in by Peleus, which is very kind of the king, but it is done so with the understanding that Patroclus will be indebted to him and therefore be serving him for pretty much the rest of his life. So he's in a slightly better circumstance, but he isn't really free. While studying under Chiron, Patroclus is finally able to learn things that he's actually interested in and given a bit of choice. He's able to say that he doesn't want to learn about fighting because it doesn't interest him, and he instead wants to learn more about medicine, and he can kind of find a glimpse of happiness and a bit of freedom in that moment in time. But once Achilles is called to war, Patroclus finds himself kind of lost again. The first fight shows him just how inept he is on the battlefield and how out of his depth he is in this scenario. It is only when the war goes on and on and on that Patroclus is not called to fight every day and can instead find his talents elsewhere. He realizes he is quite talented with medicine due to what he learned with Chiron and is able to help by healing others in the camp. He is able to finally do something that feels meaningful and lead a life that feels pretty happy, you know? He's able to find contentment in his work and bond with the people he helps, and he's also able to be with Achilles. Compared to Patroclus, Achilles, it would seem, is dealt a bit of a better hand in life. After all, because of his lineage and his reputation, before he ever even sets foot on the battlefield, he is already known as the best of the Greeks. And while to some people that could be considered a better destiny, it is still a destiny. Achilles spends his whole life knowing that he will find glory in war, and he also spends his whole life with his mother breathing down his back, trying to make him the best warrior possible. And not only was his glory foretold, but also so was his death. It seems like Achilles literally never had an opportunity to make any large choices in his life. He could kind of make smaller, less important decisions, but when it came to his grand life plan, that was all laid out by other people and by prophecies. It wasn't ever something that he truly chose. At the end of Song of Achilles, Patroclus is speaking with Thetis, or more accurately, his ghost is speaking with Thetis. Though she was Achilles' mother, she really only knew him for his glory on the battlefield, and she only knew that that was what he was destined to do. Patroclus narrates, "At first it is strange. I am used to keeping him from her, to hoarding him for myself. But the memories well up like spring water, faster than I can hold them back. They do not come as words, but like dreams, rising as scent from the rain-wet earth. This, I say, this and this. The way his hair looked in summer sun, his face when he ran, his eyes, solemn as an owl at lessons. This and this and this. So many moments of happiness crowding forward." Again, I promise that we are going to be getting to Thetis later, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to illustrate just how complex Achilles was. Everyone knew that he was a great warrior, and everyone knew that he was going to achieve so much on the battlefield, but Patroclus is one of the only people in Achilles' life who gets to see him as a person rather than a man of prophecies. During the Trojan War, Patroclus is finally free to do things that actually matter to him, and Achilles is finally achieving his destiny. However, at the same time, they are literally stealing time away from the fates because of the prophecy that says that Achilles' life will end. When the rest of the Greeks are expressing their displeasure that the Trojan War has gone on for so long, Patroclus reflects, "For me, these 4 years had been an abundance, time that had been wrested from the hands of miserly fates. But for them it was a life stolen, from children and wives, from family and home." This is part of what makes Song of Achilles to me such a beautiful tragedy. The same time that the two main characters are finally able to be themselves and enjoy a life together is the exact same time that they are finding what every other man around them has lost. As a reader, I wanted the war to go on forever. I never wanted to have to read about the death of either of these two men whose story I had been following and whose love was so strong. But of course, every other person in Troy would want the exact opposite, and it's hard to blame them. It was mentioned several times in this novel that in Grecian society at this time it was acceptable for men to take other men as lovers, or more commonly boys as lovers, but it was absolutely not acceptable for their life partner to be another man. And I think that it's very interesting that just like their very relationship kind of goes against the grain of society at this time, the period of time in which Patroclus and Achilles can finally find their happiness is also at odds with everyone else around them. Listen, I am a sucker for romance, but I am very, very picky, so it's really rare for me to be able to say that Song of Achilles had pretty much everything that I could ask for in a romance. I feel like for the majority of the novel, their romance is kind of burgeoning and simple and hopeful, and it's just very sweet. It feels, to me, in a word, inevitable, but not in a way that's contrived. It just feels that it's right for these two characters to get together. Getting to read about them being happy and alive and in love was wonderful, but in all honesty, I felt the most about their love after Patroclus had already died. I said earlier, I love a sad story. And because of that, some of the most sweet and most awful moments of their romance came after Patroclus's death. Patroclus was willing to risk his life to ensure that the rest of the Greeks didn't die. When Achilles refused to fight, this was the only option Patroclus saw. After his death, Achilles is so racked with guilt that when Agamemnon comes to kind of pay his respects to Patroclus, Achilles says, "I wish he had let you all die." In a similar vein, when Thetis comes to her son to implore him to return Hector's body to Troy for burial, she tells Achilles that he has had his vengeance and that it is enough. And Achilles throws back, "It will never be enough." Both of these sentences are so simple when I say them, but when you read them in context, they are just so gut-wrenching. It's so few words, but you can really feel the emotion that Achilles is going through in this moment. Of course, he wishes that anyone else or even multiple other people had died instead of the person that he cared about most. Of course, it is not enough to get vengeance because Patroclus still isn't dead. It's just so intense when you read it. Again, I know saying it doesn't feel like much, but when you read it in the context of the novel, these two simple sentences are like punches to the gut. Little moments like that hurt so much because for the rest of the novel, their love felt so real and I felt so connected to these two men. So that's why I enjoy moments like this despite the pain that they bring. But then for the end of the novel to be them finally getting to rejoin together, it kind of felt like when you're a kid and you get a lollipop after going to the dentist. After all of this heartbreak, there's a moment of comfort. But because the moment is so small and the pain before it had been so great, it doesn't feel like a typical kind of contrived happy ending to me. It doesn't feel like it was forced or like a typical happy ending. It just felt right. Again, it just feels like the perfect conclusion to their relationship where there is allowed to be all of this pain and then there's like a little bit of comfort after the angst. And I just loved every minute of it. Despite being a book about two men falling in love, Song of Achilles is very illustrative of the hardships that women had during its time period. Literally every woman in the novel falls victim at one point or another to the whim of the men and the gods around her. I've mentioned a few times now that Achilles' mother was injured in a way that hindered her mental capabilities. He describes that injury as such. At her temple, a starburst of white gleams like bone, the scar from the time her father hit her with the hilt of a sword. Menodius despises his wife's condition and blames her for it despite the fact that it is a direct result of an injury caused by her father. Even though she is indisputably the victim of abuse and it's not her fault that she's in this state, Menodius views it as her fault for some reason. She's a woman, that's the reason. And that is a theme that carries on throughout the rest of the novel. Pretty much anytime a woman does anything, there is at least one man who takes issue with it. Deidamia is made to marry Achilles by Thetis, and she seems more than happy to do so. But when Patroclus discovers where Achilles has been hiding, Achilles immediately abandons her. The only solace that she has is that she had been impregnated, and so she can look forward to being a mother and having a child. However, it is revealed that as soon as the child is born, Thetis intends to take him from Deidamia and raise him by herself. During the course of reading, I couldn't help but be glad that Patroclus and Achilles stayed together and that Deidamia didn't kind of get in between them, but it's also very hard to view her as a villain. All she wanted was to have a happy family, a husband, and a child, and yet in the end she is left with nothing at all because of the whims of men and gods. Further on in the story, Agamemnon is particularly brutal to women. He sacrifices his own daughter to the gods in an attempt to appease them so that they can set sail for Troy, and once they are there, he allows all of his soldiers to take bed slaves, I'm sure. I don't need to tell you what the function of those people was. One woman who was meant to fill such a role, Briseis, is claimed by Achilles. He, of course, has no interest in her, and so she is able to lead a relatively normal life in the Greek camps. Of course, it is important to note that that is a relatively normal life because, you know, her family still was killed and she's going through a lot of hardships, but compared to how other women have it, unfortunately, you have to look at that as a positive, that she is allowed to have a relatively normal life. However, when Achilles offends Agamemnon, the High King takes Briseis as collateral, and Achilles abandons her. So even the main characters and the men that you would argue are most noble in Song of Achilles are not always defenders of women. And though at times she herself was complicit in the mistreatment of women, I think that Thetis is the novel's most grand example of how hard her gender has it. It is very easy to view Thetis as an adversary while reading this novel. She doesn't approve of Patroclus in literally any way and actively attempts to thwart him from having any sort of relationship with Achilles. But before passing too much judgment, I think it is important to remember where she is coming from. Thetis never asked for her role in all of this. Peleus was so pious a man that she was gifted to him by more powerful gods. Early on in the novel, Patroclus narrates, "Everyone, even I, had heard the story of Thetis' ravishment. The gods had led Peleus to the secret place where she liked to sit upon the beach. They had warned him not to waste time with overtures. She would never consent with marriage to a mortal. Peleus waited for her to emerge from the slate-colored waves, hair black and long as a horse's tail. Then he seized her, holding on despite her violent struggles, squeezing until they were both exhausted, breathless, and sand-scraped." So yes, it is very easy to hate Thetis for coming between Patroclus and Achilles, but we have to remember she was a victim of rape, and then in a very similar way to Deidamia, she loses her child. Not immediately, not wholly, but when you compare the lifespan of a mortal person to the immortality Thetis has, I'm sure she felt like she had almost no time at all with her son before prophecies stole him from her. Thetis spent the whole of Achilles' life trying to mold him into a warrior grand enough to merit him being gifted immortality, because it's the only way that she could spare both him the pain of dying and also herself of losing a child, the harrowing pain of that, and also the loss of the only good thing that came of the terrible situation she endured with Peleus. When Achilles is grieving for Patroclus, Thetis says that his son Pyrrhus is going to be arriving to finish the war. She is filled with contempt for her son, believing him to be a lesser warrior than Pyrrhus, thinking that his love for Patroclus is what prevented him from being great enough to become immortal. Again, it is easy to see this as a detriment to her personality, but personally I see it as more characteristic of someone who has experienced so much pain and knows that there is only more pain in her future, that she has kind of closed herself off and become cold to try to protect herself. And I think that that can be seen in the development she experiences as a character at the end of the novel. As I've said before, Achilles and Patroclus are buried together, but Patroclus's name is not on the grave, meaning that he can't find rest and is haunting the grave, basically. Thetis goes there often to mourn her son, and because of that, the two end up striking up conversation. Though they have been adversaries for pretty much the entire novel, they have no one else to turn to in this moment. Patroclus knew Achilles best, and he's also the only person who can freely and openly talk to this goddess because he's kind of beyond the reach of her wrath. This allows them to reminisce about their shared loved one and kind of get over the rift that had been between them throughout the course of Song of Achilles. Patroclus narrates, "The memories come and come. She listens, staring into the grain of the stone. We are all there, goddess and mortal and the boy who was both." That line gets me every time. Patroclus shares all of the memories that he has about Achilles, and in return, Thetis opens up to him about her assault and what it was like to become his mother. Through this newfound bond, I like to think that she is able to heal a little bit. During the entire novel, Patroclus is probably the most constant defender of women, and so I think that he's the perfect person to be able to listen to her in this way. And in return, he is able to tell her all about her son's truest self. At the conclusion of their time together, Thetis gives Patroclus the ultimate gift. She carves his name into the tomb, finally showing her acceptance. Through this gift, Achilles and Patroclus can finally be reunited in the afterlife, even though that is somewhere that Thetis cannot follow. So she's giving Patroclus the gift of seeing her son again, even though it's not something she can have herself. It is a huge moment of character growth because she is able to put aside her own selfish desires and feelings and kind of grant mercy and, again, acceptance to the man who loved her son so dearly. Of course, I was so happy that through any circumstance, Achilles and Patroclus were able to be together in the end, but I could not think of a better way for this to happen than for Thetis to take part in it. As I said, Thetis is a prime example of how in this society, women had little to no say even if they were a goddess. But in the end, through her kind of redemption arc, I think that she also became a great example of just how caring a woman can be. My husband always tells me he thinks that my taste in stories is strange because, as I've said a few times now, I like sad stories. I like to feel hurt when I read. I prize stories that make me physically ache with sadness, and Song of Achilles did just that. I think that being able to elicit strong emotions in a reader is the mark of a good plot and also the mark of a good writer. On my second read through of this novel, I cried literally through the last 30 pages straight, and that's precisely why I enjoyed it so much. It gave me pretty much everything I hoped for, and that is not something that I can say often. I know I said this at the beginning, but Song of Achilles has been wildly popular across the internet. Most of the things that I have seen have been very positive, but I have seen some people saying that it doesn't quite live up to the hype. Regardless of what side of the fence you land on, I would love to hear your comments down below and kind of hear your opinions on this book. And I do hope you were able to enjoy this video regardless of how you personally feel. I know this was a longer review, but honestly, I cut out a lot that I didn't say because I just had so much to talk about because I loved this book so much. So I guess if you are following me, you could kind of gauge how I feel about a book based on the timestamp of a video. But yes, that is finally going to be it. Like I said, I hope you guys did enjoy. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.